Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar, Lions, Tigers, and Boards, Oh My. We're going to start and end on time. That's our goal here. So once again, welcome to today's webinar, Lions, Tigers, and Boards, Oh My. My name is Hannah Brokenshire, and I'm the Communications Strategist here at the OAC. Webinars like this one are being offered because constituents have told us that you'd like to learn ways to do your work more effectively and efficiently. We have more than 80 people registered for today's session, and we know from webinar feedback that board governance is a topic that organizations are continually working to improve. Before I introduce today's speaker, our own Christy Farnbauch, a few technical details are necessary. Everyone on the line is currently muted or in listen-only mode. This cuts down on feedback during the presentation. There are 4 handouts from our presenter posted in the system. You can find those under the handout tab in your webinar control panel, and the handouts will also be available after the webinar. We'll use the question box in the control panel for capturing your questions for Christy. I'll be monitoring those and will facilitate the Q&A during the session as appropriate, and we'll also leave some time at the end for your questions. We'll take 2 polls during this webinar, so please provide your feedback accordingly. Your results are shown only in aggregate, so feel free to be honest in those polls. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll send the link out to everyone as soon as it's ready. And after today's webinar, you will receive a link for a brief survey in your email inbox. Please take 5 minutes to give us your feedback about today's presentation. Your feedback helps us to design more meaningful professional development opportunities in the future. So now that that housekeeping is out of the way, I am pleased to introduce today's webinar presenter, Christy Farnbauch, the OAC's Innovation and Engagement Director. Christy joined the Ohio Arts Council in February 2015 as Innovation and Engagement Director. In this role, she curates, designs, and facilitates quality professional development opportunities for the field and staff. She oversees special projects and partnerships, communications and public relations, and arts learning for the agency. Ms. Farnbauch brings more than 25 years of nonprofit and entrepreneurial experience to the OAC. She served as a board member on several local and statewide nonprofit boards and has served in leadership positions, including as a board chair and executive director. She has coached many organizations through strengthening their board governance practices and has taught board development workshops for various organizations, including the Columbus Foundation. And with that, I'm pleased to present Christy Farnbauch.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm thrilled to talk with you about board governance and working to strengthen that. Thank you, Hannah, for being my co-pilot today. I'm really happy to have you along to help me in this journey. So I want to let you know that today I've designed today's webinar to really look at the 10 basic responsibilities of high-functioning nonprofit boards. And it's coming from there's a handout for you called the Top 10 Responsibilities, Roles and Responsibilities of Boards, and that's based on some work out of BoardSource, which is a really wonderful resource. If you just Google BoardSource, there's a lot of really great resources and information out there that you can take advantage of. And my goal is really to provide some tips and tools that will strengthen your board governance starting yet this afternoon or tomorrow. This is really focused on best practices, and I know that there's theory and then there's practice. But I want to at least kind of get you thinking about what best practices are, and if you're an executive director or a board chair, give you some tips and tools to think about the current board that you're on. So here's my big statement and my big idea. So poor board governance, I believe, is really at epidemic proportions. And I hear this from other funders, from organizations, from clients I've worked with over the years. And some of those symptoms of struggling board governance issues is to be struggling financially, perhaps losing donors or ticket buyers, or visitors are falling off. Maybe you're experiencing some frequent staff turnover. Perhaps you have trouble meeting quorum in a board meeting. These are really all symptoms of some underlying likely board governance issues. And so again, hopefully today will give you some tips and tricks and tools to begin to strengthen that from where you sit within your organization. This is a little chart I want you to take a look at. I'm going to walk you through it, and then our first poll is going to be based on this chart. So here are kind of 4 stages of board governance, a continuum, if you will. And this comes from, I did some work with my friends Allie Stirring Philanthropy up in Toledo, and this comes from some work that we did together. So if you start on the lower left-hand corner there in the dysfunctional category, this is a board that is really asleep at the wheel. You lack quorum, the committees don't meet, materials are minimal, meetings last many hours, 3, 4, 5 sometimes. Members argue over every point, lack of trust in your chief executive, and often these are the ones that make the nightly news. Recently, I think you've probably heard about Wounded Warrior Project or the Live Strong Foundation, and several others. Those are examples of organizations that have become really dysfunctional and unconscious. When I started working in the arts 25 years ago, I won't tell you who it was, but the first organization I worked for, I followed an executive director who had embezzled money. And it's a great place to start as a young person out of college because you can only go up, as I usually say. But the reason that it happened is that the treasurer was reimbursing the executive director for expenses that should never been reimbursed. And no one was catching that in the financial materials that were presented at the board meeting. So that's an example of a dysfunctional board. Functional is a little bit better. You're a little more conscious. Meetings take place. Likely 20% of the board members do 80% of the work. You have some board vacancies, some undisclosed inefficiencies. Meetings are boring and perfunctory, and again, people maybe don't like to show up or don't look forward to them. If you move up to responsible boards, this is where a lot of people, this is comfy, right? This is comfortable land. Attendance at board meetings is pretty good. Most committees are meeting, financial reports are shared, board members are mostly engaged, but there's still some confusion about roles and responsibilities. Some board members are really unclear about the organization's mission, but things are functioning okay. You're getting by. And then there's really exceptional on the board continuum, and those are organizations that are really focused and driven by their values, vision, and mission. They're forward-thinking. They're highly self-aware. They're disciplined, knowledgeable, calm. Board meetings are fun. You know, I always think, I wonder about this a lot, why board meetings seem to be so disruptive in organizations. You know, execs and staff might spend a week getting ready for the board meeting, and I always sort of wonder why that is. Some trusted sources like BoardSource actually predict that 70% of board meetings, the time is spent looking in the rearview mirror. Think about in your own board settings, how many times are you just going over reports and perfunctory things and updates of things that already happened instead of being in the exceptional category and thinking forward at what will become and you know, working on some really important issues that will come in the future. So thinking about these 4 categories, I designed the first poll, and Hannah's going to launch it for me. Again, your responses are an aggregate. We cannot tell who's saying what. So be honest, thinking about where you sit from your perspective. And I know we have executive directors and staff of nonprofits and board members and board chairs. From your perspective, Hannah's going to launch this poll, and you all vote which one of these 4 you kind of land in. From your perspective, how's your board doing?
So we've got about 78% of folks have voted. So we'll give you a couple more seconds to see if we can get that a little bit higher. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, so get your last vote in. Somebody jumped in there. Awesome. All right, the poll is now closed, and we're going to go ahead and share the results.
Yeah, what do we got, Hannah? So I can't, well, I can kind of see it. It's real little on my screen,
Yeah.
Hannah. Looks like we have a few in dysfunctional.
Yep, it's about 5% in dysfunctional, 47% in functional, which is the highest one, 42% in responsible, and 5% in exceptional.
Okay, great. That's about what I would imagine. That when I do strategic planning with organizations, I always start with a board survey, which I recommend that boards actually do once a year. There are lots of examples online. I have some samples I could share via Dropbox, but it's good to do a board self-assessment once a year and sort of see where you think you are and where you land. And those results are pretty typical for what I've seen. So how about board governance role? So I decided to order these 10 and spend a couple of time in a couple of areas where I tend to get the most questions and have the most feedback where organizations need help. So one is this idea of what does the board do and what does the staff do? So here are the roles. The board gives direction by granting authority and setting limits. And the staff, the executive director and all the staff, execute the direction by exercising that authority subject to the limits by the board. And we'll talk in a minute about a real clear policy and procedures manual. What are those limits, and what is the authority that's being granted, and getting that real clear. So throughout this presentation, I've dropped in some high performance attributes. So this is sort of the gold standard, if you will. If things are going well, your board members are going to likely wear 3 hats, and you can only really wear 1 at a time. They're either in governance mode, so when the full board meets and they take high-level decisions related to the organization's mission. Most of what you do is in governance, right? Or they're in implementation mode, which is an individual board member, or sometimes a committee, is granted specific authority to act on the full board's behalf. For example, perhaps an executive committee that meets in months other than when the full board meets to take care of some daily business, the governing business of the organization. Or perhaps you have someone who will head up selecting a firm for a financial audit, or directing a search for a new chief executive. Sometimes we grant authority to finance committees to manage the investments on behalf of the organization. And then the third category is as a volunteer. When board members serve as organizational volunteers, and in this role, you are accountable as a board member to the chief exec, the staff member, or another volunteer you're working with. So often, the board provides the overall leadership for the organization, but when you come off of that board and you're sitting side by side with somebody as a volunteer, you're a volunteer. You shouldn't also have your governance hat on at the very same time. All right, so let's talk for a minute about board recruitment. This is number 1 of 10 if you're keeping track. And this one is one that I get a lot of questions about. How do we get the right people on the bus? How do we get the wrong people off the bus? And how do we get all the board members in the right seats? And this is really an ongoing process. I'm thinking about, do you have the right people on your board? You likely have a nominating committee or hopefully a governance committee or executive committee that works on recruitment. It's an ongoing process. I am a big believer personally in term limits, so I don't think lifetime board members are really a very good idea for a whole host of reasons. So typically you tend to see 2 to 3 year terms that can then be renewed, maybe 2 or 3 times, whatever seems right for your organization. But you want to, kind of want to stagger those terms, and you want to do the same for the board members as well as for officers. But I've seen some challenges come up when you leave people on your board for a lifetime on both sides of that, right? And we're going to talk about it in a minute. Yes, you can fire a volunteer, because I often hear the argument, well, they're volunteers, we got to take them, we can't fire them. In fact, you can, and I'm going to show you a way that you can do that. And also you should know, as you think about recruiting, sometimes people don't want to do on your board what they do all day long. So we often might get the smart young millennial who's really great at social media, and they do social media all day long. They don't really want to do that on your board too. Maybe there's something else they're interested in that they'd like to do. Maybe the accountant doesn't want to be your bookkeeper. Those kinds of things. So think about that and ask people how they'd like to contribute. What does a great board member add? So my guess is you've heard about the T's. You've heard about time, talent, and treasure. We hear those a lot. The board members bring their time, their talents, and their treasures. They also bring capacity, connections, and commitment from their seat in the community. And they bring wealth, wisdom, and a willingness to work. So I like to think about the C's, the T's, and the W's when I think about a good board member. And I'll give you a tool in a minute for how you might map that out. And here it is. So this is a board planning, I guess, board profile tool. Sometimes it's called a board matrix. Sometimes it's called a board prospect sheet. This can take many forms. I could have shown you 10 examples. You might do this in Excel and make a category for everything you're looking for in somebody. This is a version done in Word on one page, right? So think about, why is someone joining your board? Why do they really want to be there? And ask them that. Are they just coming because their company has money and they've been placed on your board? I know that happens. I know that the local company says, we'd really like Susie to have experience being a nonprofit board member. And that's great as long as Susie is interested in your mission. If your mission is children and education, that's wonderful. She might be a great board member. But if she's not interested might not be a fit long term. So try to figure out why they really want to be involved. And then look for all these things. Are you looking for diversity in all forms? Gender, age, education, where they live, experience, those kinds of things. So here's one tool. You can find many more online, and likely, hopefully, you have your own within your organization. One place to think about, sometimes I'm asked, well, where do we find a board member? I've not used this resource a lot, but I know LinkedIn is growing as a potential place to find board members or people who are looking to volunteer. I don't know if you know this, but LinkedIn is quite a powerful search engine and has search capabilities. Really think of LinkedIn, quite honestly, as a database of businesses. And if you get into that advanced search function, you can really do some deep digging in terms of people's interest and how they're looking to contribute. You can see up there on this is a screenshot. There's a Find Board Members tab, and there's some work here around nonprofits. So this might just be a resource that you could explore a little bit further if you're looking for people to serve your organization in a host of ways. So I said a little bit ago that you can fire a volunteer, and this is a tool, and that's a little harsh, but you know what I mean. Somebody's not keeping up their end of the bargain. You need them to step up to the plate. I hope that you have a board member agreement in place, and if you don't, here's a sample. And again, this is a handout in your materials, and we'll make it available after the webinar. It's simply a 1 to 2 page agreement. It's a promise, if you will, that as a board member, and you can see some generic points there that I've created, I will do these things. I will attend this many board members. I will make this size of contribution. I will do these things. And then the second half of the form is what the organization will do to support me in my role as a board member. And everybody signs it. The board chair signs it, the board member signs it, the executive director signs it, and away you go. I would recommend renewing this every year, and especially when you get a new board member. This is the promise. This is what we want you to do. Then when you get down the road and someone has stopped participating or not participating at a high level, you have a place to start a conversation. You know, you can say, look, Joe, when you joined the board, this is what you committed to. This was our promise and the covenant you made to the board. What's going on? Sometimes life has gotten in the way and they just can't serve anymore, or things have changed in their personal life and they're embarrassed to tell you. I can't tell you the number of one-on-one interviews I have done with board members, and the first thing they say is, I know I'm not participating fully and I feel guilty about it. And guilt is a place where we just retreat, right? We just can't be open with people about what's really going on. As a board chair, I have used this kind of a forum conversation with people who ultimately left the board. It was a mutual decision. It didn't have to be ugly and awful. They were just in a different place than where they were maybe when they joined the board 5 or 6 years before. So it's really a helpful tool. And this, combined with your term limits, can really help you to make some shifts when you find you need to, and come out really ahead for both sides. So here's some tips for board member success. How do you help board members, be set up for success for you and for them if you're the exec, right? So build relationships first. Get them involved in committees. Use them as volunteers. You get to test them out. You can see if they're going to work, right? If they're a volunteer and they don't show up for volunteer assignments, or they don't show up for the work they've said, then don't put them on your board. They've proven to you that they're not terribly committed and they may not be a good board member. So pay attention to what they do as you build those relationships. Be honest and upfront about expectations when you're recruiting board members. Create job descriptions that goes right along with that board agreement. As the board president, what will I do? As the head of the marketing committee, what will I do? And put those in writing. They don't have to be more than a page long, but it's really helpful to have some guidelines around what you do as a board member. And be honest with them. Here's what I think happens a lot. We'll talk about it in a few minutes about fundraising. That maybe you want everybody on your board to personally contribute $1,000. And I really want to have Suzanne on my board, and I approach her and she says, this all sounds good to me, but I really can't give $1,000. And we say, oh, that's okay. Don't worry about that part, Suzanne. It's all right. Well, it's not all right. And it's going to cause your organization some trouble and some bad feelings down the road if Suzanne comes on and doesn't want or can't give that $1,000 and everybody else is, and you've told her it's okay, that you reneged on what it is you said you wanted from board members. So be honest up front. Orient new board members. Think about a really robust, hour, 90-minute long training for members that goes over policies and procedures and has them sign the board agreement. I hit this next one a minute ago. Periodically evaluate the board's performance. Again, there's some tools you can easily do some evaluation assessment. Personally, I don't go into any strategic planning or board development process without collecting information from the board, whether in one-on-one interviews or an electronic survey. You just have to have some data to start the conversation. And then if you are a board member, take personal responsibility and be actively engaged. The executives and the staff running your organization are busy to do what you pay them to do. So don't make them spend valuable time tracking you down, getting you to RSVP to meetings, getting you, the care and feeding of board members can take a lot of time. So if you're on a board, I would just hope you be personally responsible and be actively engaged for that work. And then the next high performance attribute, when you get all these in place, it's really about recruiting, training, and retaining. And I was thinking about this is the same framework for staff we have, right? We need clear expectations for staff. And often there's a contract and we provide training. So it fits whether it's staff or board. Recruit, train, and retain. All right, Hannah, I'm going to take a minute and take a little swig of water. Are there any questions that have come in?
I unmute myself here. Only question was, we'll just make sure that everyone knows the session is being recorded. So we'll be able to send that out to you guys later when everything's finished up. So if you're not catching all the notes along the way, you'll be able to watch it again later to review.
Great, absolutely. Yep, and we'll send you that. We'll make the handouts available as well.
Yep.
All right, number 2, determine mission and purpose, right? This is a big one. What is it the organization does and why do we do it? And revisiting that once a year, making sure that you're articulating your goals, identifying the primary constituents and customers that you serve. You can't really be all things to all people, so get clear about who it is you're serving and why, and really drill down on the why. Number 3, select your chief executive. So as the board, you hire and fire the chief exec. That is the only person or people you hire and fire. I know in arts organizations, sometimes there's an artistic director that also reports to the board along with an executive director. Those are the only 1 or 2 people that you get to hire and fire. The board should not be out meddling in the day-to-day work with staff. That's what you hire your chief exec to do, and that's what you trust them to do. I know I have worked with an organization that did this, that allowed board members to come in and remove staff from their daily duties, and it was a slippery downhill slope the moment that it happened. So just be conscious about that. So here's another high performance attribute. The role of board is distinct from staff. We hit this a minute ago, but I'm going to hit it again because it bears repeating. The board's primary role is oversight and governance, and your staff's role is management and operations. And implementing those tasks, those daily tasks, accordance to the guidelines and the policy and procedures that the board has put into place. And really the best approach is that these roles are parallel and non-competing, that you're working together in a mutually supportive, collaborative manner. All right, related to number 3 about hiring the chief exec, once you hire them, you need to support and evaluate them. So those of you who have executive directors, I hope you have a process for an annual evaluation of your executive. It's not fair or fun to kind of find out that you've got a problem and no one told you. No one told you that they weren't happy about something or something wasn't working. So you want to ensure that your chief exec has the moral and professional support that he or she needs. Foster a mutually beneficial dialogue. The CEO, your chief exec needs to also figure out a system that keeps the board informed so that you know as board members what's going on, what's happening. So what is the most effective means of communication? Is it a weekly email or a monthly email? You know, how is it you'd like to be communicated with, and being open and upfront about that. All right, and again, it just bears repeating. If you're high performing as a board, your expectations are clear and the results will follow. Right. So again, just like you need job descriptions for your board members, you need a good job description for your executive. You want to create the evaluation tool and develop SMART goals. Right. Simple, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely goals. Right. Are they achievable? Can they do them? And often those are related, of course, to your strategic plan and your values and your mission. Number 5, the board should ensure effective planning. Right? Does your board have a strategy? How are you getting from point A to point B? Board members should actively participate in the overall planning process, assist in the implementation and monitoring of the plan's goals, and just sort of stay up to date on that, right? I personally think a 5-year strategic plan is it's a long time. Things are changing. We are called upon as nonprofits to be nimble and flexible. So I'm kind of a proponent of some guiding pillars or some big guiding themes, if you will, 3 to 5 goals, no more. Any more than that, and you might not get them done, according to Stephen Covey. So 3 to 5 kind of big pillars that guide your work, and that you're constantly checking in and making sure that you're achieving them in the best possible ways to serve the constituents that you need to serve. All right. Another high performance, if you're doing this right. So board meetings should be well planned. Board members are prepared and engaged. Members are prepared. Materials are prepared in advance. So sending your financial reports 2 hours before the board meeting is really not a best practice. People can't review them. They don't really know what's in them. That's how people get reimbursed for expenses and embezzle money that they shouldn't be getting reimbursed for, because nobody's paying attention to those financials. So a week or 2 in advance, you all decide, right? How do we want those materials in advance, and then commit to looking at them. You all know the phrase "time is money," right? So board meetings are valuable. And according to Nonprofit Times, the average value of an hour in Ohio for someone who is volunteering or serving as a board member is $23 an hour. And I tell you that by way of, if you are keeping track of in-kind support, which you should, the time that your board members spend counts as in-kind contribution, you can calculate that at $23 an hour. So if you're in that dysfunctional mode and your board meetings are lasting 3 hours, just do the math on that, times 15 board members. And you likely have execs on your board that make way more than $23 an hour. So being efficient and effective is really important from that time is money standpoint. All right, Hannah, I'm going to take a breath again. Any questions popping up?
Yeah, we actually have a couple coming in, so we'll go ahead and start at the top. The first one that came in was, Christy, can you address reorienting a veteran board member who joined prior to new orientation practices? Any tips for doing this without insulting the veteran board member's experience?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one tip might be do it when you get new board members on board, so the next time you recruit somebody new, you could make the case that that board member missed their training, and you want everybody to go through this, and you value them, and just make sure they're on the same page. Maybe you have something new going on you'd like to share with them, and you might use that as the format to do it. I probably the easiest thing to do is do it when there's some new folks, and you're doing a new orientation, and oh, Bob, you missed that training when you started, and we really want to make sure you're approaching it from his or her standpoint, so that they have the most up-to-date tools and the best information to be effective. I often say, nobody gets up in the morning and says, "I hope I have a bad day." I don't think anybody gets up in the morning on your board and says, "I hope I'm a really terrible board member, and I hope I do really great harm to the board." Let's hope they're not thinking that. So again, think about what they need to be an effective board member and how you help them feel comfortable, right? It's really not about you, the exec, it's about them and how their experience as a board member. So that's one way. There's probably others. I bet people on the phone have other ideas as well, but that's one.
Awesome. Do you want to take another question or wait until the end?
Sure. Yeah, no, let's take another one.
Okay, so this goes off of talking about strategic plans. We had a question, how do you impress upon a board the need for a strategic plan?
Yeah, so I worked with an organization once, and the incoming board chair said, yeah, planning, schmanning. I don't care about all that strategic planning stuff. I want tactics. I want to know what we're going to do. And I said to him, well, with all due respect, that's like taking a trip and getting in your car without a map or GPS and driving for 8 days. You can have all the tactics you want, but if you don't know where you're headed or what the end result is or what the impact is you're trying to make and what success looks like when you get there, it's not terribly effective, right? So I think from the standpoint of your board, it's getting them to understand the so what of your work, which is driven by your plan and your vision and your goals. Where is it that you're trying to get? How will you know when you get there? How can you celebrate successes or make course corrections when things aren't going so well and you're getting off track? So that plan is just a guide. Now, a real practical part of it is a lot of funders ask for your strategic plan. We do here at the Ohio Boards Council. We want to see your plan. So on a very tactical level, if you want to go there, we need it for our funders. But I really hope it's more about needing it for your organization. So you'll know where you're going, how you're meeting your goals. Are you serving constituents in really meaningful ways? Are you able to leverage the money that you need to do the great work that your community needs you to do? Okay. Is that it for questions right now?
We've got a couple more. It's up to you if you'd like me to keep on moving with questions or if you wanted to move through slides.
Let's roll. Let me do a few more slides and then we'll come back. Maybe I'll answer the questions in the slides. We'll see. But we will have more time, and keep track of those, Hannah, that are in. I'll be sure to answer them.
Sounds good.
All right, number 6, monitor and strengthen programs and services. So again, the board's responsibility is just to ensure from a governance perspective that the programming fits the mission and the vision and the plan, right? So your plan it's just a guideline, right? But it helps you. Actually, so the point I just answered about your strategic plan, it helps you say no to things that you don't have any business doing, right? People who work here with me know that I like the not to-do list. We all have a to-do list, but who has a not to-do list? What's on your not to-do? What are the things you need to quit doing so you can do the next right thing and to advance your organization? So that's another thing here that the strategic plans helps you do. It helps you monitor effectiveness, reviewing those goals, and say no to things that don't really fit where it is you're trying to go as an organization. Peter Block is known for saying, if you can't say no, your yes doesn't mean anything. I like to think about that, right? If you can't say no, your yes doesn't mean anything. So here's a high performance attribute, and that is that your committees are serving the board's needs, not the staff's needs. So you have board committees that meet, and they're really working on again, those forward-thinking big issues to help the board. So with staff assistance, because staff needs to be in the mix here, committees speak to the board, not for it, right? Committees help the board do better work. That's where you take it offline, and rather than spending 3 hours in a board meeting, you get really high functioning committees who do the digging in, working with the staff, and then that frees up the board to make those higher level decisions. So just again, as another high performance attribute of your board culture. Number 7, ensure adequate financial resources. We could talk about this one all day, but we will not, because this is a whole nother webinar that we did. I don't know, we do a lot about financial resources and fundraising. This is a big topic for boards, right? So one of your board's foremost responsibilities is to secure adequate resources and to allow the organization to fulfill its mission. Many funders will ask you about board giving. is, does 100% of your board give financially? And in some cases, if you say no, they will say no, thank you. I can think of banks and other kinds of organizations right here in Columbus that if you can't say your board gives at 100%, they will not consider a proposal from you. And you can understand it, right? They want to make a good investment. Any funder wants to make a good investment with their dollars. And if your board members aren't investing financially at 100%, why should they? Why should they make that investment? Everybody must give financially and as volunteers. So often small organizations will say, well, we can't really ask for any money, but boy, you know, Suzanne puts in a lot of money as a volunteer, her volunteer time, and that is valuable for sure. But we also really need, again, best practice is some sort of financial commitment from every board member. And that's for a couple of reasons. Everybody's investing financially, and it gives you, as an organization, a little bit of unrestricted capital to work with. It's not tied to a grant. It's not tied to a donor. It's straight up cash to work with from your organization. Some boards have get or give policies. So if I come on as a board member, I need to give you $1,000 or raise $1,000 from somewhere. Maybe it's from my company, but either way, there are those kinds of policies that exist. And again, be upfront when you're recruiting new board members. Be upfront about that. So I have come up with this list of 10 ways board members can help with fundraising, because the reality is, I'm going to tell you the boards I've worked with, this word fundraising and this idea of raising money sometimes just strikes fear in the hearts of your board members. They're not trained fundraisers. They don't know how to do that. They don't know how to ask for money. It scares them. So you need to help them feel more comfortable with that. So here are some things board members can do that may not actually be making the ask, but is going to help your job as the chief exec or the job of your development office be easier. So one is share contact lists. Who do they know? And this might be as simple as getting out a yellow legal pad and writing down some people that you know who might have an interest in the mission of your organization. Ask friends and colleagues for contributions. Sometimes it's easier to ask people that we know. One of the things I've learned in fundraising, I'm not asking for me. I'm not asking for me personally. I'm asking for a cause, children, or the arts, or hunger, or whatever it is. I'm asking for a cause that's bigger than me, and for me, that makes it way easier to make the ask because it's for something bigger than myself. Secure sponsorships from companies. Again, sometimes board members come to you with contribution. I had this happen when I was a board chair. I got an exec from a local bank who brought a $5,000 contribution with her. That was the organization's commitment to being on a board, and that's really wonderful as long as you've got the right person sitting on your board. Introduce staff members to potential donors. Again, it's about relationships, right? Giving is people to people. So introduce your staff to people that you think might be interested in the cause. Accompany staff on fundraising visits. So open the door and go down and see the local corporate chair or whoever you're visiting with as a team, a board member and a staff member. You might chair or host a fundraising event in your space, in your home, in a location that you know people would really like to come to. Those are some ideas, these sort of small fundraising events. Allow your name to be used on solicitation materials. So I've seen it where someone will write a handwritten note and maybe put it on a sticky note, on a Post-it note, on a fundraising solicitation. Someone who's got that political and social capital for your organization. You can thank donors, write thank you notes, make follow-up phone calls. They could call to follow up on a letter. So I know you've heard this, those of you who are fundraisers. A letter is a letter. A letter is not an ask. Fundraising asks really are best person to person, but you send a letter sometimes to put that out there. Board members can follow up with a phone call. I gave a contribution to an organization that I might not otherwise, that I had worked with, and I got the solicitation letter. People always say when you call, I didn't get it, I misplaced it, will you send me another one, whatever it is. You can do that when you're talking with them face to face. And I personally got a message on my voicemail from a board member who said, hope you got our letter, it's our end of the year campaign, we hope you contribute a few dollars. Give me a call if you have any questions. I did not even talk to him personally, and I wrote a check because they called and actually they did what I taught them to do. So there's a big role in thanking and following up with donors for board members, and they don't ever have to make the ask for the money. Rate prospective donors' ability to give. So those of you who do fundraising, there's a giving pyramid and a triangle you kind of work with, and upper level donors down through small donors. They can work on that with you, help you think about where people might be in their giving level, and then also help develop fundraising plans. So in fact, if you have a fundraising committee as a part of your board, this would be part and parcel what that fundraising committee would do. It would be help develop the plan. So I know we say a lot, our boards are supposed to raise the money, but I find that board members are really nervous. I've heard board members say, I'll do anything you want me to do, but don't ask me to raise money. So you have to know that. You just have to know where people's comfort levels are. So a high performance attribute, which we've already hit on, is that all board members make an annual unrestricted financial gift, and it can be small, right? So when I was board chair of an education foundation, we weren't used to giving financially. We bought tickets to events, and we did small kind of fundraisers. We started by just taking the nickel and diming that we did of our board members, which totaled $125 a year, and said, fine, come to all the events, because we should be at the events anyway, raising friends. Come to the events, but write a $125 check every year as your board contribution. So we just changed the paradigm. They've built it from there, but we had to start small, right? We had to start small. You might even confidentially allow someone to give just a little, $50 as a place to start, because that's all they have. I understand this is primarily arts organizations and small organizations, and if you're working with somebody who can really only give you $25 or $50, that is okay, because you can say you have 100% board giving. All right, number 8, protect assets and provide proper financial oversight. This is what you're to do as a board, right? So is your board paying attention to the organization's risk? Are you ready for a crisis? Right? I'm not sure that the ones we've heard in the news lately were ready for the crisis that came down. Maybe they were. Are you ready for that? Have you had conversations about that? Do you help in developing the annual budget and ensure that the proper financial controls are in place? There's some, I don't know all the rules and regs, but there's some stuff about, the person who opens the mail should not be the person who deposits the check, should not be the person who runs the financials. That's really hard in small organizations. I get that. There's theory and then there's practice. But there's some financial controls you want in place so that you know that exec who ultimately embezzled money wasn't being reimbursed for things they shouldn't be reimbursed for by one person, the lone treasurer, right? Do you have directors and officers insurance, liability insurance? Do you have those kinds of things in place to protect you and the board? There is some protection of board members in the Ohio Revised Code. I heard a really smart tax guy talk about that once. But do you have those things in place? If I were a board member, I would ask you, do you have directors and officers insurance in place before I agreed to come on your board so that I'm protected? So that's number 8. Number 9, ensure legal and ethical integrity. So again, ultimately, it's the board's responsibility to adhere to legal standards and ethical norms. There are a host of policies and procedures that you really should have in writing, and they're boilerplate. You don't have to make them up. They exist. Conflict of interest policies for staff and board, document destruction policies. How long do you have to keep your materials in print and paper, your financial records and such? A donor bill of rights. What do I get as a donor? What promises do you make to me as a donor? Again, you don't have to, if you don't have them, there are ways you can get them and you don't have to recreate them, because many, many nonprofits have those policies. But as a board, you want to ensure that those are in place. And number 10, last but not least, you want to strengthen the organization's public image. So work on the brand and the image, right? Get the word out about your programming. Clearly be able to articulate the mission, the accomplishments, and the goals of the community. One question I ask board members a lot is, what do you hear yourself saying most about this organization? How do you describe the work they do? Do you understand the mission, right? Are you able to garner support? And I would add here that the board really should speak with one voice. Diverse opinions on the board are terrific, But when the final vote is taken, hopefully you can get to consensus, and that you have a safe space in your board meetings to kick around ideas and explore new things. And so I've had some awful experiences with boards where the conversation in the boardroom was not kept confidential, and within an hour the phones were ringing and someone was hurt, and things got leaked out into the community. So just be careful about that, related to your image and your voice and tone that you want to use as an organization, and just embody as a board member the beliefs and commitment and value and mission of the organization of whose board that you're on. And as staff, help do that. Give them the tools to help you strengthen your public image as an organization. All right, so we've been through 10 of them. It's 2:15 according to my clock, which is great. And I think we'll jump back to some questions, and then we'll answer some questions for a little bit. I have one final poll for y'all to weigh in on, and then you'll be off on your day to develop stronger board governance in your organizations.
Great. So one question that we can start with talks about term limits for board members. And the question reads, we have 3-year terms. It has worked well as most people are ready to move on after that time. However, now we have a terrific treasurer that we would like to keep on longer. How do you include the option of renewing a term in your bylaws, and how is that done in the best way?
Yeah, so lots of organizations have this option to renew. So if I understand what they've got, it's a 3-year board term. It's not clear to me whether you've specified that out, that I can only serve one. Can I serve more than one? So if I can serve more than one, then you could renew your treasurer, no trouble. You might think about adding to your bylaws or your policies and procedures a 3-year term that I can renew 3 times. For example, the board that I was board chair of, you could renew your 3-year term 3 times. If that's not in place, maybe you want to put that in place. I've also seen where if you come to the end of your 3 years and you don't have that in place, you have to sit off for a year and then come back. So you can sort of decide. Sometimes people are really wonderful and you'd like to have them continue, but again, best practice is they go away for a little bit and then come back.
Okay, so moving on to another question. Talking about agendas. So what does the agenda of a forward-looking board meeting look like?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So you can Google this if you want. There's in the business world they do what's called level 10 meetings, and level 10 meetings are no longer than 90 minutes. If you have any corporate folks on your board, they might know about these. And the idea is we do some initial check-in, some perfunctory things that need to be approved, and some things we need to check in on. But then we spend the rest of the time on issues. And I don't mean issues bad, but I mean things we need to decide and solve to move forward, right? So what are those big things that you want to take forward into the future? So you, rather than spending your whole board meeting on reviews and reports of things that have already happened, might you have a sometimes they're called mission moments. So you have little presentations from staff members within your organization on a particular program or mission or thing that program you're working on. As you work, if you think about that level 10 and you think about processing and working on things toward the future, as you process them, you just move them forward. And I would recommend setting a time limit, right? For the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about this issue. And then for the next 15, we're going to talk about this issue. There's also a really great question that I love. It comes from a book called The One Thing. And the question is, what is the one thing that we could do, which by doing makes everything else easier or irrelevant? What's the one thing which by doing will make everything else easier or irrelevant? And I think if you think about, and I think there are more than there's more than one thing in an organization. Maybe there are two things. But if you think about that as a board, what is it that we could really focus on that would take us and propel us forward? And trying to stay out of the weeds. Let the committees do the work in the weeds, and elevate the conversation at the board table to those higher issues. Great questions.
We've got another question here talking about volunteer boards. So Christy, do you have any special advice for keeping an all-volunteer board engaged with no executive director or staff?
Yeah, I've been on those. I've been the board chair of one of those. So when you say all volunteer, what you mean is there's no staff to do the work, right? So one tactic, one thing to try is if you have an executive committee or an executive board, which is often the officers, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, however you're laid out, 5 or 6 people, who then might each chair a committee, and then they take responsibility for those committees meeting and there being an agenda and there being a set time. So we met, some of the boards I've been on, the full board meets every other month, and the executive committee or that leadership team meets the months in between, set and guide the work. So that's one tactic. Again, I hear this a lot. Likely you've all heard of Pareto's law, right? So 80 or 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And that's often what happens on boards, even when there are staff, right? That's still what happens. So that's one task. I think back to the point about clear job descriptions and clear deliverables. What is it you're expecting from those board members? I don't know if that's all clear. I don't know if you have job descriptions or what they're kind of signing on for, continuing to bring that back to your mission and your vision. Clear measurement, what does success look like? I mean, I wonder if they don't feel like they're making progress. So maybe they become disengaged. Because I don't know about you, but if I go to a meeting and we're talking about the same thing 3 meetings in a row, I'm a little weary of that, right? At some point, you got to sort of call it that we're not making the progress we need to make. So is it clear what success looks like? I asked you more questions probably than you wanted to hear, but you might need to do a little detective work to figure that out.
Great. So we have another question here. Christy, do you have a list or resources folks can refer to about what policies they should have in place as a board to ensure legal or ethical integrity?
I do, and I will put that in the materials that I send back out to you. Some of them we listed and talked about, right? So conflict of interest, that's a big one for your board. Document destruction is another big one. Donor Bill of Rights is a big one. There are a handful more that I will put together and make available for sure. Thanks. Good question.
Great. Do you have time for one more?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 2 questions that go back to volunteer settings, and I'm going to try and combine them so they both get answered.
Okay.
So how do you have a board in a totally volunteer setting make the shift from a working volunteer to a governing board member at the board meeting for board meetings? So does that make sense, Christy?
Say it again. Yeah, kind of.
How do you have a board in a totally volunteer setting make the shift from a working volunteer to a governing board member at the board meeting?
Yeah. So think back to that slide about the hats I talked about, right? And this happens a lot. So when they're, let's say they're a volunteer and they're in essence serving as their executive director, because that happens a lot. There's one board member, maybe your board chair, who also sort of functions like your executive director. So when you're at the board table, you're the board member and the governance. So you have to sort of put that, I think, have to put the hat on about, we're talking about the governance and the roles and the policies and procedures. But when you're the volunteer and you're running the program, right, that's a different hat. So you have to almost silo. I know this happens a lot. You have to almost silo what it is you're working on at the moment and be clear about that, right? That's a really great question, and it feels it's complicated because I don't know the organization at the moment. But think about how you, depending on the setting that you're in, the hat you're wearing in the moment, right? And how you go back and how you can go back and forth between being the volunteer and doing the work to the governance side of it and helping with the policies that guide the work. Right. Great. The other thing is I don't know how big the organization is, but I was a board member and a board chair of an organization that did not have staff. And by the way, you can have non-paid staff. So you might want to think about, would the person who's trying to do 3 things serve you better if they dropped off the board and became your volunteer staff member? Right? So think about, that's another way through. You might think about that. Because again, you can have unpaid staff, and I'm really a believer. So this organization I was a part of, we were a $500,000, $500,000 organization, budget size, and after 25 years, we just reached the point where you can't run a $500,000 organization without some kind of even a part-time staff person. In this day and age, when people are so busy and pulled in so many different directions, it's really hard to do that. So maybe you can't pay them, but maybe that person serves you better as a non-paid staffer. That's another way to think about that.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to go ahead and launch this last poll.
Terrific.
So that should be launched for everyone now.
So you can answer as many of these as you want. I hope you found some value and some tips and tools from the webinar today that you can use. I really try to give organizations tips and things they can put together starting tomorrow. So what's one action? What's one little step that you could take that would help put you in the, and to take the next right step to make the next right thing happen for your organization? And these are only 5 things. There's probably a whole bunch more you could put on there, right? Maybe it's even a conversation with your board chair if they're not on the call. So I just want you to start thinking about, and again, afterwards we'll send you the recording so you'll have all the slides and you'll hear my voice again if you like. And we'll put up the handouts and I'll put together the list of policies for you all that you might think about.
Okay, great. I'm going to let you guys take a couple more seconds to read those options and get your votes in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll if everyone is finished voting. And share our results. So Christy, can you see the results or do you want me to read a couple of them off for you?
I can't really, they're really little in my little screen.
Okay, so it looks like at the top we've got 39% of people responding with write clear roles and responsibilities for the board. Coming in at 33%, design a more robust board recruitment strategy. And also tied at 33% is prepare a board member agreement. At 31%, we have hold a formal orientation process for new board members. And at 8%, we have create a comprehensive board policy manual.
Great. Great. So it looks like you all are going to get busy on writing some clear roles and responsibilities, which is wonderful. And then look at the board agreement, which will, I can't tell you how much that will be a great tool for you all. If you don't have one, that board agreement is really, really helpful. I say that by someone who's used it and who has signed it and has helped put them in place. So that's really heartening to see. And that orientation process is great. The recruitment strategy, hopefully, again, you have a tool you're using to recruit board members. I really want to thank you all for spending time with the last hour with me this afternoon. Again, I hope it's been valuable and meaningful and you got some tips. I am here at the Arts Council. Feel free to call or email me with follow-up questions. I'm happy to answer those and work through some things with you. That's partly why I'm here. And I know Hannah's going to wrap up, but I just wish you all a lovely afternoon.
Okay, great. And we've fulfilled our goal. It's 2:30, so we took up an hour of your time. Thanks everyone for joining us. We had a lot of people engaged on the call. Thanks for sharing your questions. And like Christy said, you know where to get in touch with us if you want to follow up, and look for that recording and those resources from Christy. Okay. Thanks everyone. We're going to go ahead and close the webinar and stop recording now. Have a good day.